Something someone once said to me that I'll never forget. They said, raw vegans are strange people.
As a vegan, do you ever feel like you're living in a parallel universe, aware of things that many others don't even seem to notice, let alone acknowledge? I'm Chrissy Benson, host of the Vegan Posse podcast. We talk with vegans from around the globe who, like you, are living lives of integrity and compassion with an eye toward justice. Through their personal stories, you'll come to see that you're not an outlier. In fact, you're part of an entire posse of individuals who aren't just keeping the peace, they're creating it through their food choices and beyond. You won't be saddling up, but you're in for the ride of your life. Welcome to the Vegan Posse. Hey Posse, I'm Chrissy Benson, host of the Vegan Posse, bringing vegans together to help animals everywhere. Just a few things to catch you up on. First of all, we held our very first Posse Soiree in April 2025, and it was a smashing success. It was so great to connect with the Posse live and in person, and to give everyone else a chance to connect too. We'll be holding more live events via Zoom in the months to come, so stay tuned. We'll generally focus on a particular topic or theme. So if you've got topic ideas, guest suggestions, or questions for me and or Dr. Jen Hawk in our monthly Posse Talk series, email them to veganposse.email@gmail.com. Another epic vegan gathering that you absolutely don't want to miss is the in-person conference Vegan Summerfest from July 9th through the 13th in Johnstown, Pennsylvania, where I'll be speaking along with vegan superstars like Victoria Moran, Dr. Kim Williams, Dr. Michael Greger, and Dr. Alan Goldhammer, to name just a few. When you register, make sure to mention that you're a friend of Chrissy Benson and the Vegan Posse so that they'll make sure to give you extra special treatment. Next, if you value the work that we do here at the Posse, consider becoming a financial supporter via Venmo or PayPal. Buy me a virtual coffee, chip in for recording expenses, which are not exorbitant but are substantial. Your help at any level is greatly appreciated. You are the Posse. You can make those donations to Vegan Posse via Venmo or PayPal. Finally, on a more personal note, many of you are aware that in 2022, I went back to school for yet another degree, a master's in clinical mental health counseling, and I'll be graduating May 2025. I'm seeing clients for coaching, counseling, and or vegan lifestyle coaching. If you're looking for support of the vegan variety or in any of life's challenges, the best way to reach me is to email me at christinembenson@gmail.com. And now for this week's episode with someone who's rather a cult legend in the fasting world. Loren Lockman, founder of the fasting and raw food retreat mecca, Tanglewood Health Center. I first heard about Loren and his work through my good friend Lyd Shaw, who'd long dreamed of doing an extended water-only fast at Tanglewood. Unfortunately, in just the past few months, Loren and Tanglewood suffered devastating financial losses due to theft, hacking, and general misanthropy, and Tanglewood is no longer in operation. Loren, however, is still very much in action, and I serendipitously got to connect with him in person here in Nashville while he was driving from Texas through Tennessee to the East Coast. Loren's story is tragic, riveting, and a real-life testament to the fact that you never know what's around the corner, and material things can be lost in an instant, as I myself learned firsthand when 1.28 Bitcoin was stolen from my Coinbase account after I was recruited for a legal project with companies Bit by Bit, Ascent Data, and supposedly top-tier law firm Morgan Lewis, and tech support company Ascent Data remote access my computer, ostensibly to help with a tech issue. Like Loren, I also learned at a new level that what can't be taken is your values, your integrity, and your commitment to what truly matters. And of course, that no level of material loss compares to the suffering that non human animals are experiencing by the billions and trillions around the world at this very moment, courtesy of our so called food system. And that's why we're here today. Without further ado, enjoy this fascinating conversation with the one of a kind, Loren Lockman. Loren, welcome to the Vegan Posse. Are you ready for the ride of your life?
Absolutely. Looking forward to it.
Fantastic. So I'm very excited to have you on the show. I first discovered your work through my good friend Lid Shaw here in Nashville, Tennessee,
Okay.
whose longtime dream was to do an extended fast at the wellness center you founded called
Right.
Tanglewood
Right.
in Costa Rica. And in fact, Lid talked it up so much that he made me want to do it too. And unfortunately, for reasons that we'll get into, the trip Lidge planned isn't going to happen. But why don't we start back at the very beginning? Why don't you talk a little about where you're from and whether you thought much about nutrition and health when you were growing up?
Okay. Well, I grew up outside of Washington, D.C., and as a child, I didn't think about nutrition and health any more than most children probably do. We took it for granted, right?
Yeah.
Now, I was reasonably healthy and was able to just enjoy life as a kid. It actually changed for me pretty early, though. I think my trajectory might be a little bit different than many people you've spoken to. In my 14th year of life, I grew 10 inches
Wow.
and didn't
Wow.
gain a single pound.
Oh,
So I looked
wow.
like a stick with a nose.
Huh.
And hormones are kicking in. I'm wanting the girls to find me attractive, and I look like a stick with a nose. And that's when I thought, maybe if I start studying nutrition, I can figure out how to gain weight and build some muscle. And so I began my study of nutrition and ultimately human health and potential at the age of 14.
Oh, that's amazing.
And that's
That's
been,
amazing. So how tall were you? Or
well,
are you?
yeah, I'm 6 feet tall. And
Okay.
I think at 14, I probably got to I went from like 5 feet to 5'10", and then I
Wow.
wound up growing a couple more inches.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm so impressed at that initiative that you actually put it together that nutrition could
Well,
help you get
you know,
girls.
we're sometimes challenged by life to become better and bigger versions of ourselves.
Right, right, right. So what happened? Did it work?
It did work, no question. I was able to build some muscle, and it was interesting because I got more and more interested in not just building muscle, but actually becoming healthier. Learning about as I studied nutrition, I was learning about the science of nutrition and how it impacted health. And that served me, or seemed to serve me pretty well for a while. But I graduated from school a little late. I spent a couple years at the U.S. Air Force Academy. Again, this is sounding bad, but at 17, I thought, well, if I become a pilot and I get to travel around the world and fly cool planes, I'll probably meet a lot of girls. And that was my thinking at 17. So I went off to the U.S. Air Force Academy. And I wound up only spending a couple of years there because of congenital knee defect, which appeared in my 18th year, as it often does.
Mm.
But as a result of that, I wound up graduating a little late. At 23, 6 months after graduation, I got very sick and later diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome, irritable bowel syndrome, systemic candida, chronic sinusitis, and 57 allergies. I'd never been allergic to anything, and I became allergic to almost everything. And so at the time, I grew up outside of Washington, D.C. I would say from a health standpoint, pretty conservative. It wasn't Southern California. We had allopathic medicine. That was it. There was nothing else. And that's all I knew. I was introduced to an acupuncturist. I had a doctor that practiced alongside of a Chinese acupuncturist at one point, and I tried that. But it didn't help me. I mean, I was getting worse all the time with 3 years of medicine. And 3 years in, I woke up. I changed doctors every year because I'm getting worse. This guy doesn't know what he's doing.
Mm.
They were all men. They were all male doctors. So at that point, I thought there has to be another way. The medicine's not working for me. It's not helping me. And I started thinking about it, and I started thinking about the fact that toxic substances probably can't make you healthier. And of course, that's what allopathic medicine is about. It wasn't always exclusively about that. But as you may be familiar with the history, in 1910, the world's first billionaire took control of the American Medical Association. This is John D. Rockefeller. And eventually, basically the world's medicine. He sort of founded Big Pharma. He began investing in pharmaceutical companies. And basically, medicine became about the distribution of pharmaceuticals for the profit of the stockholders. That's what it sort of became. And so this occurred to me. I wound up going back to nutrition, realized I was doing everything nutrition said I should do. And that's when it occurred to me, okay, maybe there's another path. Maybe I need to do something a little different than what they're teaching. And ultimately, that led me to become vegan. And a short time after, because again, at this point, I've turned my brain on to how can I make this better, right? It wasn't just, I mean, many people, and I applaud them, become vegans because they don't want to kill animals. They want, it's about cruelty and so forth. And that's a wonderful thing. That wasn't where my head was at the time. I was just trying to get my health back.
Yeah, you were suffering. Yeah, that makes sense. Yes, that you would care about one very important animal, you.
That's right. I mean, I think this is what we do, right? We have to focus on ourselves.
Yes.
Now, what happened was, it was interesting because as soon as I realized, I grew up, as probably most of your listeners probably did, I grew up having been programmed to believe that I needed animal products to be healthy. Right? You have to drink milk. You have to eat eggs. You have to eat dairy products, all this stuff. And so as soon as I realized that I did not need animal products to be healthy, my very next thought was, if I don't have to participate in the suffering and death of other species in order to be healthy, what gives me the right to? And that was it. I was like, okay, I'm not eating any more animal products. I couldn't justify it to myself.
Right. Yeah, that makes total sense. I mean, I resonate so much with that line of thinking, even though I came from the animal perspective initially.
Right.
But then when I also learned about the health piece, that raised what was happening to non-human animals to just a new level of unconscionability, because not only did we not need these products, to survive, but these products were actually causing all our chronic Western diseases
Quite harmful.
and, immense animal suffering. So,
well, and it's interesting because, I spent a lot of time sort of negotiating those perspectives. I spent several years on the board of the Vegetarian Society of Washington, D.C., more than 30 years ago. And you had to be vegan to be on the board. There were like a dozen of us. And everybody else on the board had come to veganism for animal rights reasons. But there were some really unhealthy people. And I said to them, if you can make some improvements to your diet, because again, I'm focused on health at this point completely, and this is how you can become as healthy as possible. And people would say things like, well, I don't care about myself. I only care about the animals. I would say to them, right, but most vegans and vegetarians self-identify as being vegan and vegetarian for health reasons. If you look unhealthy, you may very well be turning people away. And I see that all the time. People say, vegans look unhealthy. I don't want to be a vegan, right? So I think anyone who cares about the animals has perhaps a responsibility to take care of themselves so that they can be a better example for the people who really need to make a transition, but who often don't want to because they're looking at people going, I don't want to look like that.
Right. No, I agree completely. And in fact, that reminds me of a piece I wrote for Victoria Moran's blog years ago,
Yeah.
called your health a social justice issue. And it was about just
Exactly.
questioning whether, with everything that's happening with big pharma and the level of control that they exert over society,
Yeah.
we owe it, arguably, or at least I, from my perspective, we owe it to ourselves and society to be as healthy as we can so that we can take some of that power back.
I agree completely. And I'm sure Victoria, I've known Victoria for 30 plus years. I'm sure she did too.
Yeah, well, she published it in her blog, so yes,
Yeah.
she feels the
Beautiful.
same way. Yeah, so how was it, being part of those circles back in those early days?
It was amazing. I mean, I met a lot of amazing people who were, um, someone once said to me, as you know, and your audience may or may not realize at this point, I went from vegan in a short time to raw vegan, and from raw vegan to fruitarian. And again, we can talk about that if you like, but um, something someone once said to me that I'll never forget. They said, "Raw vegans are strange people." And I thought for just a moment, I said, "You're absolutely right. We are." Because, strange means not typical, not normal. And most people are overly concerned about what other people think. In order to do something that most people don't understand, which has been, the focus of my life now for more than 30 years, you have to not be too concerned about what other people think. So absolutely strange people, no question about it.
Right, right. It helps to have practice being an outlier when it comes
That's right,
to
exactly. Yeah.
food, because
And
we're used,
I forget which American business coach and motivational speaker once said something that I love. He said, "What other people think of me is none of my business."
right, right.
Ultimately, we have to. Again, I got to the point, as I said a few minutes ago, where I thought I can't justify eating animal products when there's no need to do that. That's, causing other species, sentient species, pain, death. I can't be involved in that. Hopefully, if everyone was functioning from a place of consciousness, I think we'd have very different outcomes, a very different society.
Yeah. Yeah. Agreed. Agreed. So how did you make those transitions, from vegan to raw vegan and then to fruitarian? What was
Right.
that
Well,
process?
to be honest, I mean, easily and overnight, because so I'm engaged in this process, right? I've got this, my brain turned on. Whatever you focus on, this is old news, but this. Let's say you decide at some point that you're interested in a particular car. You need a car. You're looking at cars. You start thinking about a particular. You like this car. You start seeing them everywhere because your mind is now focused on that. They were always there, but you just didn't notice them. Now because you're focused on that. So I'm focused on how can I take my health and vitality to the highest level possible. And I'm looking for, anything I can do. Again, and I mean, I pat myself on the back because a lot of people get to a place and they go, yeah, this is good enough. I'm doing okay. And I realized that perhaps my ability to be my very best self depended on me feeling and functioning as well as possible, having as much energy as possible, having the most mental clarity, being as connected consciously as possible. And so I never stopped thinking about this. And I was going to health conferences. I was actually at a health conference in Washington, D.C., walking down a sidewalk, public sidewalk between two buildings, going from one lecture to another one. And I walked by two people engaged in a conversation, and I overheard two words. Right now, I should tell you to back it up a little bit. And again, this may surprise some people, but it occurred to me a long time ago. You remind me where you are.
Nashville.
You're in Nashville. Okay. I'm going to be passing through Nashville in a few days.
Oh,
And I'll stop and say hello.
amazing.
I ask you that because you look like you're in a warm place. You're obviously inside. But if you think about where on the planet humans could live 365 days a year in our birthday costumes without all the fabric, right? It's tropics. We're tropical animals. We know that human life started in subtropical Africa. We've never changed. We have to maintain a temperature of around 95 degrees in the center of our torso. You can learn Wim Hof breathing and go out and play in the snow in your bathing suit, but you can't stay there very long. You can't live there, right? We need houses and heating systems and clothing in order to survive outside of the tropics. We could, in the tropics, stay alive without buildings, heating systems, or clothing. Okay, we could do that, but only in the tropics. So I realized, okay, we're tropical animals. And the question I asked myself was about everything as I thought about, okay, well, what should I eat? And how much sleep do we really need? And all these questions that affected maximizing our health. And again, as I've alluded to, but haven't actually said, as a now 37 plus year health coach, what I do is I help people take their health and vitality to the highest level possible, guaranteed. I guarantee the results because it never fails if we make the right choices. But the question was, what would I do? How would I meet that need if I lived in the tropics? So I'm walking down the sidewalk and I overhear someone say, raw food. And it was like a light bulb went off. I thought, there's at that point I didn't know. It's still not really completely clear. I've seen estimates around 25 million animal species. How many of them eat cooked food? Well, just the ones we give it to. And they're the ones that are as unhealthy as we are, with heart disease and cancer and diabetes and so forth. Those diseases don't really exist in the natural world, in nature. So I thought, okay, I've got to stop eating cooked food. And I came to that realization in late October, and I had already told my oldest sister that I would have Thanksgiving at her house that year. And I knew she was planning on doing special things for me because I was vegan. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to eat cooked food until Thanksgiving. And the next day, no more cooked food. And that was 33 and a half years ago.
Wow. Wow.
And it's been an incredible thing. Again, from there, I honed it. I realized, there are people who eat all kinds of things that can be consumed raw. I would suggest probably shouldn't be consumed at all sometimes, most of the time. So I've been able to hone it down even further. But that was sort of the genesis. I went raw because I realized, again, okay, I don't believe cooked foods are optimal. And I can tell you that having helped more than 16,000 people take their health to a new level, when people actually go through more than 11,000 of those people have fasted with me. And again, this may be shocking to people listening, but the process that you were referring to that Lidge wanted to do, and still can remotely, is fasting with me. For my clients, it's been an average over 29 plus years of 26 days on just water. And it's life-changing. It's life-changing. The results we've had are incredible, things that medicine considers miraculous. I just got a message from one who fasted with me before in the Philippines, who was in a car accident. It's now probably been 6 years. When we first met, it had been more than 4 years. She rolled her car. She was texting while driving in California and rolled her car down an embankment, broke her neck, and was paralyzed from here down. She could move her arms, but she couldn't actually manipulate her hands, and so has been considered quadriplegic. She needed 24-hour care. She was Filipino descent. She moved to the Philippines because her father and stepmother lived there, and it was much less expensive to have 24-hour care there. Her stepmother was a doctor and unfortunately intervened. She was fasting with me. The doctor forced her to stop, gave her a bunch of IVs, and then allowed her to complete their feeding process with me. When she began to feel her spine for the first time in more than 4 years, when she began to be able to eliminate for the first time without mechanical assistance for the first time in more than 4 years, and when she began to be able to pick up a glass and drink from it for the first time in more than 4 years, the doctor said it's because of the IVs. Now, this is someone who had already undergone more than 40 surgeries as a result of the accident and had had hundreds of IVs. They didn't heal her before. Now they miraculously healed her. The doctor wouldn't admit that fasting might have done anything for her. But medicine says if you're paralyzed for 2 years, there's no chance, and there's been no improvement, there's no chance of healing. And yet we saw these amazing improvements happen more than 4 years after the accident. She didn't fast as long as she wanted to because the doctor intervened. So now she's back in the US with other family and just wrote to me yesterday and said, I want to fast again. So we'll see.
Wow. Wow. So tell us about your path to fasting. How did that enter the equation?
Well, I mean, again, it was, here I was at 26 by the time I woke up to the fact that medicine wasn't really helping me at all. And I'm looking for answers. And so I wound up changing my diet, but I'm still looking. And I wound up coming across a book called Rational Fasting
Huh.
by Professor Arnold Ehret. And Ehret was talking about people healing as a result of going weeks without food. And it sounded pretty extreme, but it also made some sense to
Right
me.
up your alley, right?
Well, I suppose so. I've never shied away from extremes if they've made sense. But and I grew up with some exposure to fasting. I'm Jewish, but only on my parents' side. That's both parents. I wasn't
Got
religious
it.
at
Got
all.
it. Took me a minute, but
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
wasn't religious, but we fasted one day a year. I'd done that every year growing up. I knew I could go one day without. I mean, I think a lot of people, maybe some of the people listening. I mean, today fasting is much more accepted than it was when I started my practice nearly 30 years ago. Back then, people would say, "What are you talking about? That's insane." Today, perhaps because of the fact that intermittent fasting has become so popular, the word fasting is now in much more common use. And so when I say fasting, some people say, "Oh, how many hours are you talking about?" And I'll go, "A lot." A lot. We're not talking 16 hours. We're talking 26 to 30, 42 days sometimes. Usually it's 21
Amazing.
days or more is what my
Wow.
clients have done. So I'm looking for the answer. And, I read this and I thought, okay, I didn't really know if I could survive 2 days, but I decided to try. I parked myself close to the refrigerator just in case. And I did 2 days, and then I did 4 days, and then I did 8 days. And I worked my way up until I was fasting weeks at a time. And amazing things happened for me. And I mean, I just began to feel and function much better. The diet helped for sure. Giving up dairy products and other things made a difference. But honestly, it was fasting that turned things, really changed things. And
Hmm.
I'm now more than 3.5 decades without a day sick.
Hmm.
I mean, I started fasting 38 years ago, and I haven't been sick in almost 38 years.
Mm.
Not ever. I haven't missed a single day of work. I grew up with three sisters. I'm seeing them now more than usual. Unfortunately, there's been some tragedy. I mean, it's not really tragedy. My mother was 90 years old almost, but she just died last week.
Oh,
And so
I'm
I'm in her
so
house.
sorry.
Yeah,
Oh,
it's okay.
wow.
It's possibly going to happen to each of us at some point. I've
Yeah,
heard
the
that
one
rumor.
guarantee. Yeah.
Heard that rumor. So I'm here in her home and have been, talking with my sisters. I'm trying to get everything ready to sell, essentially.
Mm.
I actually came here when she went into intensive care almost 2 months ago because no one else lives. She's in Houston, and everyone lived on the East Coast where we grew up. So my sisters are, two of them are married. One of them is, has a very busy practice. I mean, they're all busy in their lives. I can work from anywhere, right? I
Hmm.
mean, most of my work is online now. So I came here to make sure that she was okay. And I'm still here and I'll be here until, but, I'm seeing my sisters, and the point is that, they're all great, but they're aging much more like most people do. We're all in our 60s now. My oldest is nearly 70, oldest sister. But everyone wears glasses. My vision's still better than 2020.
Mm.
Everyone has far more of the wrinkles on their face that you would expect to see. I'll be
Mm.
64 in about a month. Um,
Mm.
I don't have really any. That's the result of what I've been doing and teaching all these years.
Mm. Mm. So that very first fast, I mean, it must be hard for you to recall at this point because it was so long ago.
Yeah.
But was it, I mean, to me as an emotional eater, that was my struggle. I mean, was it hard to not eat for that long?
Um, well, I was highly motivated again because I wasn't well. This may be hard for people who have never really been ill to
Mm.
understand, but I am incredibly grateful for getting so sick at 23
Mm-hmm.
because,
Mm-hmm.
again, I'm now almost 2/3 of my life living from this place of an incredibly high level of health and vitality. It wasn't, again, I grew up normally and was okay, just a normal kid, but then in my early 20s, very sick. And at that point, if you could have convinced me that eating cardboard boxes would have made me healthy, I'd have tried it. I would have
Got
done
it.
anything to get my
Yeah.
health back.
Yeah.
And so it
Yeah.
wasn't hard because, again, I read this book and it made some sense to me. And I thought, okay, and if this is what it needs, and maybe I can explain a little bit, right? I think we've all been so brainwashed to believe in the whole medical lie, for lack of a better word, right? If I'm pushing your buttons, just hang on. I don't mean you, Chrissy, but whoever might be listening. Many people think, well, medicine saved my life. Possibly. There are times when that happens. Certainly, I mean, medicine has saved my life, and I still believe in trauma medicine. I've severed arteries 3 times.
Oh.
Um, yeah, I have a motorcycle, and I had a quadricycle in Costa Rica. I used to fly a small plane. I used to skydive. I I've been threatened with being thrown off of every ski resort in Colorado and Utah because I would go out there with my college buddies and we would play tag. And the ski patrol would pull us over and say, if you guys don't slow down, we're taking your lift tickets. I used to rock climb cliffs, surf. And so I've injured myself doing these things. And when I get injured, I fast to heal. What most, broken bones are a good example. I have broken 7 of my fingers, 3 of them twice, 2 of them twice. You can see this one perhaps is not straight anymore. This one right here. You can see here
Mm-hmm.
it bends a
Yeah.
little bit. Well, that's because I broke it and didn't get it set. What the doctor does is he puts the 2 pieces of bone back together and then puts a cast on it so it
Mm-hmm.
can't move so that it heals straight. But the body does the healing. Healing is a biological process. So every species on the planet, including your cat or dog, if you have or have ever had companion animals and they've ever gotten sick enough, they will instinctively stop eating. You can put the bowl right in front of them. They won't touch it. Okay? Every species instinctively does this. 25 million of them, because processing food takes roughly half the body's energy every day.
Mm.
And so, in fact, I don't know if you can remember back 15 or 18 years, but when you were a child, you probably didn't have much of an appetite when you didn't feel well, right? We often don't want to eat when we're sick, but I mean, my mother said you have to eat. I didn't want to. Okay, my body knew that in order to heal, much too much energy goes into processing food. Now, people think, yeah, but we need the nutrients to heal. We don't. We actually have what we need in the body.
Mm.
In nature, it's not just for healing purposes. Consider the fact that in nature, there are times where there's not much food available, whether it's a drought, a flood, a fire, whatever it might mean, freeze. And if we're not in the tropics, there's no freezing. But these kinds of things occur where animals might not have, or you're simply injured. Imagine if you're off on your own and you badly injure yourself and now you're lying on the ground because you can't get up and it takes a week to heal. I mean, there are perhaps people listening who truly believe in their heart that if they skip lunch, they might die. Okay. But the fact is that the average person can go 6 to 8 weeks without a meal. And again, my average client fast is just short of 4 weeks. I fasted more than 1,000 people for 42 days or more. The
Wow.
longest client fast, buckle up. The longest client fast was a young man who was morbidly obese. He had stage 4 testicular cancer, and he
Ugh.
fasted with me for 4.5 months
Oh my goodness.
on just water. And when he was done, there was no trace of cancer.
Wow.
So, the thing to understand is that healing is a biological process. Detoxification is a biological process. Our bodies are always doing this. If you cut yourself, it heals all by itself over the course of several days. Fasting simply allows that to happen as efficiently and as effectively as possible because if we're doing it properly. If you watch the dog, have you ever seen this happen with a dog or a cat?
Yeah, I mean, a little bit, a little bit.
What did the
Yeah.
animal do?
Well, with my cat when he was really sick in his final weeks, that unfortunately, in my experience, it was always a sign that things had really, really just turned,
Yeah,
and
oh, I'm
there
sorry.
wasn't going to be much more time left.
Right,
So
right.
I don't have much experience, witnessing it as a temporary
Yeah, feeling.
temporary
Right,
thing, that
right,
results in
right. Yeah.
healing. But
So
I'm aware of this information just in general. Yes.
and what happens with these, like a dog, for instance, which big dog can go sometimes 6 or 8 weeks as well without a meal. And
Amazing. Yeah.
yeah, and what they do is nothing. They'll lie. They may
Mm.
change position because it gets uncomfortable if they stay in the same position all the time, just as it does for
Hmm.
you or I. So they may roll over or change position, but otherwise they don't really do anything. And the whole point is to conserve as much energy as we can, so the body can use that energy to cleanse and heal. And so that's really what it's about.
Yeah, yeah. So how did you decide to start helping other people do this and take it professional, so to speak?
Right. Well, I saw such incredible results with my own health. And at the time, I didn't even know that there were places you could go. This is all pre-internet, right? Uh,
Right.
we had a search engine of sorts. It was called the Yellow Pages, and if you went to
Yeah.
the Yellow Pages and looked up fasting, there was nothing. There was nothing there.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
I could have gone to the library and done some research, but I didn't. I had no idea these places existed.
Mhm.
So I was fasting on my own using a book by a guy who'd been dead for years. And, I made a lot of mistakes. I learned the hard way. And I later learned, it was my first public lecture on this subject, on health. I'd done some public speaking, I'd done some acting, and I did some public speaking in college. But it was my first public lecture on health. And it was a small, only a dozen people showed up. Um, and there was a woman at the end of it. She said to me, "Are you familiar with the American Natural Hygiene Society, which is now called something different? It's the
NHA.
National Health
Yeah,
Association."
National Health
Right.
Association, I think. Yeah.
So I'd never heard of these people, had no idea what natural hygiene was. But she said, you should check them out because they teach a lot of the same things that you're saying. And these were just realities that I came to on my own. It made
Yeah.
sense.
And this was in where were you
I was,
geographically at this time?
yeah, I
Maryland?
was, I was in Bethesda, Maryland at the time.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, And in fact, what happened was two raw vegan restaurants had opened up, one in Bethesda and one in Georgetown,
Oh,
not
wow.
too far away. They both opened the same year. I became good friends with the guys running the places.
Mhm.
The one in Bethesda was only open for about a year, unfortunately.
Mm.
Um, but it was there that I gave this first lecture. I got to know the owner, and he's like, "Yeah, you can give a talk here. Tuesday nights aren't very busy, whatever it was." Uh,
Yeah.
but that was my introduction to natural hygiene. And I realized there was a conference. This was probably in April or May. And their annual conference that year was in like early August.
Mm.
So I went to the conference. It was in Baltimore, so it was only an hour away. I stayed at a friend's house. And that's when I learned that there are places that you can go and fast. And I looked around and they all felt too institutional to me.
Mm.
They weren't the kind of places I'd want to park myself for 4 or 5 weeks. There's now tons of research. There's multiple studies that show if you look at people in hospital beds, and hospitals are places I think you want to try to avoid being if you can,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But if you're in a hospital bed and you can see a tree through your window, you heal 15 to 20% faster than someone in a hospital bed that can't see a tree. And I thought, yeah, well, how much more powerful would it be if you were actually in nature?
Right.
So I decided that this was such a powerful thing and so few people knew about it that I wanted to create the very best place to fast
Mm.
possible. And that's what I did. I started off in Bethesda, Maryland, and
Mhm.
it was a big house on a small lot and I landscaped it so that no matter what window you looked at, you saw trees and flowers and
Mm.
so forth. And then after a few years, we outgrew that. I only had space there for 9 guests. And
Mhm.
I outgrew that space. We moved about an hour, hour and a half outside of the city, up into the hills of Western Maryland, the mountains. And I had 17 acres on top of a mountain, just a few miles south of Camp David.
Mm.
In fact, back then, Bush was president, the first Bush, and the helicopter would fly overhead every Sunday night on its way back to D.C.
Wow.
Um, and so we were there for a while, in this amazing place, just surrounded in the forest, surrounded by nature. But I really wanted to be in the tropics. And so I had planned for many years. It was a little hard to make the move. It was easier not to move than to move everything.
Yeah. Yeah.
I finally got it together and moved everything down to Central America, and was there until recently. That's where I've been.
How did you find your spot?
Well, I looked around quite a bit. I actually made half a dozen trips, maybe 8 trips to Central America. I moved several times. The place that we just disoccupied a month ago was my third permanent location. We were in one place for more than 6 years, 6.5 years.
Okay.
We were in another place that was theoretically going to be, actually, there were 2 places. Well, yeah, one place I had leased that was always going to be temporary. Then I moved to another place where the owner, an American woman, wanted to sell, but she wanted to stay on site. And that wound up in the end being a deal breaker. So I was there for a little while. And then I found the site where we eventually spent the last 13 years.
Wow. These were all in Costa Rica?
No, the first site was actually in Panama. I started off looking in Costa Rica, but after half a dozen trips, I didn't find anything. I moved to Panama.
I see.
And then when eventually that wasn't gonna work for us anymore, I wound up going back to Costa Rica and finding a site.
Yeah. Yeah. So tell us about those early days of having having the center and just welcoming people and kind of learning how to do this with people professionally.
Yeah. Well, it was an amazing time. There was a learning curve for sure. But it was incredible. I mean, I started off, it was me working with, up to 8 people at a time. I got an email from a woman who said, from Ireland, and she said, do you take interns? And I thought, that sounds a lot like free labor. I said, yes, I do. Absolutely. Come on over. And she lived on site and helped me out with people. And from there, I actually wound up developing a program where I would have, we called it an internship program. It was education and fasting and some months working. It was like a 4-month program. And we had about 110 people go through that process.
Oh, wow.
Over the course of a bunch of years. Eventually, I stopped doing it because there were a lot of people that, especially when we moved to Central America, they wanted to be in Costa Rica, but they didn't particularly want to work.
Yeah. Yeah. I can see that.
So and it being in Central America, where labor costs were much lower, I thought, you know what, I'm just going to hire people to do this work, and we're not going to do this program anymore.
Yeah.
It actually made much more sense at that point. But yeah, it was an amazing thing. I mean, I still hear from people. I sometimes run into people. I ran into a woman last year that fasted with me way back in the first location. And I hadn't seen her in 25 years, perhaps, or more. Might have been 2 years ago. And she said to me, aside from the color of your hair, my hair was black back then, and now it's a much lighter shade of black. And she said, aside from your hair color, you look exactly the same. But she was just talking about how impactful that experience was. In fact, this happened again. I was in Miami until I came here to make sure my mother was okay. And I did an interview on a podcast like this one with a friend that you may know, Jillian Barry, and Jillian interviewed me for the second time. And then my girlfriend was visiting. She said, we were a couple hours away. She said, we're going to have a small party at my house. Why don't you guys come? So we went down there, and I didn't know that a client of mine from 20 years ago was going to be there. A woman who had fasted with me in Panama and actually had done the internship program. So it spent, she was actually with me in Costa Rica. So it would have been 12 years ago, right? It was at the same site we were at now. She was in one of the first groups there. And she was shocked and wound up coming to visit Sylvie and I, um, where I was staying at the time, away from Miami, but was just raving about how impactful the experience was for her. And I literally get messages from people all the time
Mm.
saying, this changed my life. It was the best thing I've ever done for myself. So there have been challenges for sure. It hasn't been an easy path. I've worked pretty much nonstop, like 12 hours or more every day for nearly 30 years. But it's always felt so rewarding because I've been able to witness so many people taking
Mm.
their health to these amazing new levels.
Wow. Wow. And how do people generally fare after they leave? Or do they manage to sustain it? Do they stay raw? Do their
Right.
health conditions
Well,
remain? Yeah.
some people don't even intend to stay raw. I mean, some
Mm.
people come in saying, there's no way I'm going to do that diet. I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
it's up to you. What I encouraged everyone to do would be to stay raw for at least 6 weeks, because after a fast of 21 or more days, which is like 99% of my clients were doing 21 or more days, and after a fast of that length, it will take the body 3 to 4 weeks to finish removing all the plaque from the arteries. I don't know if you're aware of this, but studies in North America have shown that the average 14-year-old's arteries are 40% blocked with plaque,
Unbelievable. Yeah.
30% by the
Yeah.
age of 9 for the average child,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? And so, most adults have a lot of this stuff in the body, and it will take the body begins breaking it down immediately. We have lots of evidence for that. We have 100% success eliminating hypertension with well over 1,000 people. And I should say that we've had a couple of, we've had probably 3 or 4 people who are in their mid 70s or older who came in with severe hypertension that complete the process with their blood pressure much better, but still slightly above normal. And
Hmm.
usually with the second fast, we can get them below normal as well. But
Okay.
everybody else completes the process below normal, right? Medicine, as you know, I'm sure, says you're taking medication for the rest of your life,
Right.
right?
Right.
So this
Right.
is something that always heals. Well, that's because we're breaking this plaque down, right? Your body is virtually infinitely intelligent, and it knows that if it's got all this plaque in the arteries, it's going to have a hard time delivering enough oxygen and nutrients to your brain. And of course, as a result of doing it, the pressure is going to be higher, which causes
Right.
damage to various things. So the body begins to break this down right away. We see type 2 diabetes, 100% success eliminating it.
Mm.
It's crazy what our bodies are capable of if we give them a chance. So,
Yeah, there was, in fact, I mentioned, our mutual friend Liz Shaw, but it occurred to me that I had actually heard of your place prior to meeting Liz, because there was a couple who lived in Nashville at the time. They were a part of a group that I hosted called Vegan Peace, and their names were Abby and Lee. And they went and did an extended fast with you, and then they came and spoke at Vegan Peace afterward. And it was really interesting because that was my first exposure to the
yeah.
concept of these extended
Did you think
fasts.
they were crazy?
um, well, I mean, I was open, I
Yeah.
was very curious. I
Yeah.
mean, I love to eat, so that didn't sound appealing, but it was really interesting hearing them. And one of one of my mentors is a psychologist named Dr. Doug Lyle, who's affiliated with True North Health Center.
Right.
And so I'm familiar with all the work that they do. And so, I definitely intersect with that world a great deal. So,
Right.
yeah, very interesting. But so tell us, I mean, you also had some controversy, surprise, surprise,
Yeah. Yeah.
around your clinics. Yeah. What was it like just, trying to help people heal and meanwhile trying to deal with all of these,
Well,
things that happen?
sometimes frustrating. What's tended to happen. I mean, it never became an issue, but I'll give you an example of the kind of thing that's happened. We had a woman who was, if I remember correctly, right around 70, about 2.5 years ago, and she had stage 4 cancer. She went everywhere with an oxygen tank. Her skin was whiter than paper, bleached
Mm.
paper. She had like no vitamin D. And medicine had said to her doctors had said to her, we can't, there's nothing we can do for you.
Mm-hmm.
And so she contacted me and said, will fasting help me? Well, my response to anyone who's dealing with, who's already been told that they've got X amount of time to live is generally the same. And what I'll say is, our bodies are amazing and they're self-healing. Sometimes we get to a point where they're not capable of healing anymore because there's been so much damage. But there's no harm in trying. I mean, if you can afford the cost, you don't really have much to lose if they've already told you you've got a death sentence. And so she came and fasted with us. She was, things were pretty far deteriorated, and it was one of those situations that was going to be a challenge. And she went home and she died. And her family said she died because she fasted.
Mm.
When, her doctors made it very clear that she had limited time to survive.
Mm-hmm.
And so, there's a lot of finger pointing, et cetera, and threats of lawsuits. We've never actually been sued by anyone for anything that's happened. I'm sure there are people who have talked to lawyers, and lawyers have said to them, you don't have a case. First of all, these are adults who choosing to make their own choices, and they're doing something. I mean, you can't demonstrate. They couldn't demonstrate that we had done anything to cause any issues for them.
Wait, you mean individuals are allowed to make their own choices without checking with their doctors?
Doesn't that sound crazy?
That's a little revolutionary there.
Yeah, I mean, we, as you may be aware, the first real controversy, and a lot of people don't know the whole story. Back in our first location, we were investigated by the Maryland Medical Board, who came to me and said, we think you're practicing medicine without a license. And they investigated and made the determination after a couple months that we weren't doing anything wrong. And then a few years later, we had moved to this larger location, and we had a young client. She was, I think, 22 maybe. She had been diabetic since she was a young child, taking insulin.
Mm.
And I want to say about a week or 10 days into the fast, her blood sugar went up, and she wasn't using insulin, her own choice. I mean, we tell everyone, and always have, you're probably still going to need to manage your blood sugar, right? So you take you measure your blood sugar as you normally do 3 or 4 times a day. You take insulin as needed. So one morning her blood sugar was high. It wasn't dangerous, but it was high. So she went to take some insulin. Now, I don't know if you know much about diabetes, but
A little bit. Yeah.
diabetics normally take a fast and a slow acting insulin. Slow acting insulin is like a baseline insulin that because the idea is that their pancreases aren't producing the insulin that our pancreases are. And so they have this baseline in the bloodstream, and then they take a fast acting insulin to counteract the effect of whatever they're eating. Mm-hmm. Before they eat, sometimes after they eat, they might need a little bit more, but this acts quickly. So her blood sugar was high. She went to take insulin, but she took the slow acting insulin. Well, an hour later, her sugar was still high, of course, because this slow acting insulin is a baseline that acts over the course of many hours. She continued taking slow acting insulin, and over the course of several hours, I mean, she was doing this on her own, and eventually she took enough that her heart stopped. The doctor on my staff, naturopathic doctor, revived her. We got her to the hospital alive, and she died a few days later. And there was a doctor at the hospital that said she died because of mismanagement by the hospital. I fasted more than 24 MDs, and they've all said the same thing. They've said, if someone is alive at the hospital, there's no reason for them to die. We can manage her sugar at that point, right? But the hospital screwed it up. Well, the medical board, again, accused me of practicing medicine, refused to hear the doctor's testimony. They wouldn't even let her testify at this hearing. And they said to me, you're practicing medicine. I said to them, your statute says that practicing medicine means that someone is diagnosing, treating, or prescribing. We don't do any of those things.
Yeah.
And they said, well, it doesn't matter, because if someone comes to you and they get well, it means you're practicing medicine. It was only later, I had this revelation later that day when I was home. I thought, what I should have said was, it seems to me if someone comes to me and gets well, then we're obviously not
practicing medicine. Exactly. Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking, that being accused of practicing medicine is an insult.
Right.
Wow. So Yeah, I know you've been obviously you've been through a lot, just in general and especially in recent months. But what tell us what happened with Tanglewood Wellness Center, which is no longer
Well, it's a long
existing.
story. It's probably longer than we have time for. I can give you a little bit of the. I mean, basically, the initial. Well, I'll give you several points in brief. Uh,
Yeah.
Things got challenging with the pandemic, and I put that L in there on purpose. You may know they planned this for decades. There was really nothing to see here, folks. I mean, not that people didn't get sick; they did, but as you may be aware, no one died of anything else. It was they called the cure for all other diseases. If you got sick, they said it was COVID.
Right, right.
One of the things that Costa Rica did at the time was they closed the borders for about 5 months. And even when they opened the borders, I mean, most people couldn't immediately get on a plane.
Mhm.
And so we had 6 months where we had 3 clients. I always operated Tanglewood like a nonprofit. I've never took a salary. We operated like a nonprofit. We covered our expenses. My idea was to try to keep it as affordable to as many people as possible. So we charge a fraction, half roughly, of what people pay to go to True North. And I would say
Mhm.
there's much better
Mhm.
experience in Tanglewood.
Mhm.
My opinion, of course, biased. But we that made things really challenging. I didn't. My staff was like my family, and I didn't let anybody go. I was able to do a lot of work online then, since we didn't have any clients. I was able to do more work online with people.
Mhm.
I supported the entire. I mean, I had 25 employees, big
Wow.
mortgages, insurance,
Mm.
taxes, all of this. And I covered everything with the work I was doing online because we literally, in 6 months' time,
Wow.
had 3 clients. We needed to be about 85% occupied just to cover the bills.
Mm.
And was the first piece. One of the things I was doing, I had a career in commercial real estate for about 10 years. I'd started coaching people while I was doing that, but that was my primary gig until I opened Tanglewood 29 years ago.
Hmm.
Earlier this month, it was like 29 years in March.
Wow.
And but I had made some money, and so I wound up investing in creating a nature preserve in Costa Rica. And whatever profit was coming from Tanglewood, instead of paying myself, I invested that. We had more than 700 acres just a couple miles down the road. We had the two highest waterfalls in Central America and
Hmm.
about 18 or 19 more waterfalls on site. And
Wow.
I had
Wow.
contracts for about 2,000 acres. My goal was to protect the entire head of the valley, create a nonprofit that would own this nature preserve, and then have an eco village nearby
Hmm.
for like-minded people to have a place to live in community and a way to earn a living catering to tourists. So we have a little commercial village where people
Hmm.
could run businesses that would cater to the tourists that were coming to see the nature.
Hmm.
That was the
Hmm.
idea. A woman had invested in this a fair amount of money, and a few months later decided she didn't want to be invested. Well, her money had already been used to apply towards land contracts. We didn't buy anything outright. We were making payments on land, but they had been applied to some of those contracts. We signed more contracts. We built a road. From the public road to the head of the trail was a kilometer, and we put a beautiful road in. And then
Hmm.
from the head of the trail to the bottom of the waterfall was about 2 kilometers, about a mile and a half,
Hmm.
something like that, and pretty steep. And there was a trail, but it was terrible. In some places, it was literally this wide,
Hmm.
and there was no guard, the big drop offs and nothing there. So we widened the trail to 4 feet. We put guardrails, handrails, beautiful wooden rails from local trees, all the way down any place there was any kind of a drop off. We built
Hmm.
6 or 7 bridges. The longest was 10 meters, more than 30 feet long.
Wow.
The longest ones had roofs and benches built in so that people could get out of the rain or the sun
Uh-huh.
if they needed to, and to sit there and watch the water underneath. It was really
Yeah.
a beautiful thing, but invested all this money.
Yeah.
And so I said to her, "Well, there is no money to give you. It's all been invested, but you'll get a return as per our contract. Once we're able to generate returns, that's what'll happen." She sued me, and it was she actually wrote the contract that I agreed to. I mean, she said, this is what I want. So we had a contract drawn up that reflected her terms. We had lived by every single aspect of that contract. I'm guessing they bribed somebody because it should have been a very simple thing. Well, he's done what you've asked for, so therefore you have to wait. But she won, and I didn't have any money. I don't own anything. And so, I mean, again, because there's a lot more, what I'll tell you is that in the end, that caused me to be in a very difficult situation that ultimately led to the closure, the loss of the property. And we had a deal with the bank that said, okay, I guess I need to tell you one more piece. So the only thing I could think of to raise money was I had a client that was interested in buying into the business. He'd fasted with me 3 times. It had been life-changing for him. He was a very successful businessman in Europe. And he said to me, he called me up one day while he was at Tanglewood, and I wasn't there. And he said, do you want to sell it? I said, no. But I'd said to him before, you should come on as CEO. I always wanted to help people. I didn't want to be managing 25 staff members and doing all that. I said, you've been a successful CEO. You're not running that company anymore. You should come on and run this business, right? And let me do the part I want to do. So I said, no, I won't sell it to you, but I'll say a 50%. And that was, I was looking to raise the money I needed to pay this woman back. He was getting paid off in installments for the sale of his business. And so there wasn't any way for him to give me all the money up front. So I wrote to her lawyer and said, I can pay in 4 installments over the next 2 years. And she said, no, I want my money now, knowing I didn't have it. And the business was at risk because, and this is going to sound really foolish. I mean, I've been kind of naive in some ways. They say that we imagine that other people are as we are. I would never imagine someone taking advantage. I mean, I would never do that to someone else.
Right. So it's harder to spot in somebody else. Yeah.
Right. So she had wanted to get residency in Costa Rica. And her lawyer said, you need to invest in a going business, not this land deal that in someday maybe something. You need to invest in something. So I foolishly gave her the majority of stock in my company. It was a loan on paper so she could get residency. But now she's suing me and I'm not getting my stock back. And so she was going to wind up taking over because she owned the stock. And so this prospective partner said, look, he said, I'll negotiate a deal with the bank. You let the property go to foreclosure. And he said, I have an agreement at this point with the bank. I'm going to buy it from foreclosure. They're going to let us stay there the whole time. We can keep operating. We'll set up a new company. He's like, and she'll get nothing. I said, well, when you pay me, I'll still pay her. But what happened was, as far as I knew, this is where we were. And then one day they show up and say, you got to go now, right now. You got to leave. We had clients there and they threw everybody out on the street.
Oh, boy.
It was the day that Lidge was meant to arrive. No, maybe he was going to show up later. I don't remember what his dates were, but we had about 25 people arriving that day. And so, yeah, I mean, it's been a very difficult situation. A lot of unhappy people.
Wow.
And all my staff is out of work now.
Wow.
I've lost my home. I literally lost everything I owned there. I mean, they seized all of my property and then let people walk away with it. And then someone came in and burned some of the main buildings down a couple of days later.
Wow. So, yeah. Wow. And how are you holding up through all of this?
Well, at first I think there was some shock. I mean, it was hard to believe that everything was gone, literally just
gone. Right.
I mean, I had known over the 6 months that things were in a difficult place. But again, this guy had said to me, I've got a deal. We're going to be fine.
Yeah.
Right? So I thought everything was okay. I do believe that every situation provides us with opportunities. And I had realized that I couldn't keep working the way I was. I didn't want to.
Yeah.
Working 12 or more hours a day all the time, it was too much.
Yeah.
I have an amazing partner. She has a son who hasn't seen his father in 10 years. I wanted to be able to provide that, step into that role for him. But I work it all the time. So what I wanted to do was step back, and the goal was to set up a team to run the center, and then we were actually going to set up one or two more locations. Once we had a model that was working without me, we could replicate that. That was the plan. So, this is a shorter way for me to not be running the center anymore.
Right.
A little bit of a much unhappier ending. I mean, had I known, if we got to a point where it was like, okay, this isn't going to work, then we could have had an ending date, taken people through. Then I could have taken my things, with me. Instead, everything was gone. A lot of people are upset. My staff is out of work. I will continue. I have. It was the 15th of February when we got shut down. So it's been 5 weeks now, roughly, 6. And I'm continuing to work with people remotely, as I have been for 15 years. It's amazing. We still get amazing results. It's not the same as being in paradise. Being at Tanglewood meant you were in a community of like-minded people. We would have about 32 people at a time fasting. 25 staff members taking care of them. Everyone really felt held, and it was an amazing experience for them. I can't do that anymore. And, people have said to me, well, how would would you maybe come here and open a place? Like, someone actually said, I've got some land you can operate on. I said, you know what? I don't think I'm up for starting over again. Building, working, many, many hours to build that up, having to go find the funding to make it happen, because I don't have anything anymore. So I think I'm just going to work with people remotely. It will give me more time. I started a book a long time ago. I have, as you may know, Doug Lyle is the psychologist. Alan Goldhammer, who runs True North, doesn't supervise fasts. The people actually attending to their clients are there learning to get certified. They're there for 3 months. I've overseen every client for nearly 30 years. There's no one that has the experience that I do working directly with people, especially on long fasts, because our fasts average 26. Theirs, I think, are 10 or 11 days on average.
Right.
So it's really a very different animal. And so my goal now is to get a book done, to do more of this, to spread the word, because people need to understand that our bodies can heal from almost anything. Again, sometimes it may be too far advanced, but we've seen amazing things happen even with stage 4 cancer. Sometimes.
And do you yourself still fast? Do you fast? Like, how do you incorporate that into your life?
Well, so I fast now primarily when I have something specific to heal. I don't get sick, but I still injure myself sometimes. When I after my mother went into intensive care, not quite in, actually, it was 2 months ago, it was 8 weeks ago today, she went to intensive care. At the time, I was in South Florida. My girlfriend Sylvie was with me. She lives in Germany. She was visiting. And I dropped her off. She had a flight home on Friday. One of my sisters flew out here on Thursday, the same day. She flew out that night. And I dropped Sylvia off at the airport on Friday. I went back to where I was staying, packed my things up, and drove out here on Saturday. I left on Saturday and arrived on Monday. And I've been here ever since. But, so, it's had a profound impact on life, as has, I don't know if you've been there yet, the loss of a parent is a little bit disorienting. Here's the person, my mother, the person I've known the longest, right? Started off 9 months before I met anybody else.
You've known her your whole life. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. It's, again, first of all, I believe that we live many lifetimes that we're not our bodies, that we're spiritual beings, that we will have many vehicles that we inhabit. And so transitioning, it's not the end, it's just a change of vehicle. When someone has lived nearly 90 years, I think my mother was ready to go. I think she'd gotten to the point where life wasn't all that joyful anymore for her. It's not tragic it's tragic when it's a child. It's tragic when it's someone young that still had a lot of life in front of them. My mother had lived her life. So I'm okay. I know I'll be okay. And again, this will give me the opportunity to do some different things.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's clear you are taking that opportunity and just staying forward focused. But again, my sincere condolences on just these two profound losses. I mean, the loss of
Yeah.
Tanglewood, a lifetime's work, and then of course your mother, who I'm sure was so grateful to have you in these final days and just in
Yeah,
general.
I think that's true. I think that's true. You know, it was a little sad. She at some point, I mean, even up until maybe 4 or 5 days before she passed, she still imagined she'd be coming home, and it was clear to us that that wasn't going to be possible. It was clear to us that she was, you know, I thought maybe she had another month to go, and
Mm-hmm.
then in the last days, it became very clear that they were the last days. In fact, the last time I saw her, I wasn't there when she took her last breath. That happened shortly before midnight, um, a week ago Monday, and I saw her that afternoon. And when I left there, I sent a voicemail to all my sisters and said, "This is it."
Mm-hmm.
It became obvious. But you know, I listen again. I'm very grateful to have had her in my life, and um, it wasn't always easy. She was a challenging personality, but I believe that's provides the impetus for us to grow. And it's certainly, you know, I'm the product of every single thing that's occurred in life, every person I've met, every challenge I've had. I'm grateful for all of them.
Right.
I wouldn't necessarily choose them all again,
Right.
but I'm still grateful for them in retrospect.
Right. 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 Yeah. Well, I think that's a great place to leave it. Again, thank you so much for joining us during such a just tragic time. But I can tell that you've got just the sense of yourself and the sense of what matters and what's important and where you'll go from here. So I have no doubt you'll be fine. We'll continue to follow your work and let people know about your book. And please
Thank
keep
you.
us posted on all your doings. Try not to hurt yourself.
You know, I haven't had the time to be as active in a long time, so it's less likely I'm going to hurt myself.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay. Great.
thank
All
you.
right. Well, again, thank you so much. And we conclude every episode by taking 30 seconds of silence for all the suffering animals, human and non human, who desire, as we all do, safety, happiness, and the freedom to live out their lives without interference. So, Loren, I invite you to join me in 30 seconds of silence for the animals, and we'll conclude with the sound of the bell. Thank you, Loren, and thank you, Posse. See you next time. Until then, stay strong and stay true.
Bye, everyone.